expected end is something you know and you're convinced will happen. You know it's going to happen because you're expecting it. It's like if I tell you, oh, I'm coming to your house, I'll be there by 6 o'clock. By 6 o'clock, you're looking at your watch, expecting me to arrive because it's an expected end. It's an expected end. I've told you that I'm coming. I've given you my word that I'm coming. And as a result, you expect to see me at the time when I said I'm coming. And we already established that God is not a man that he should lie. So if God says that he's given us an expected end, that he's given us, that he has plans to prosper us and plans to give us a future, then we should expect him to prosper us. We should expect him to give us a future. Because an expected end is not, is something that you know will happen. It's something that you know will happen, and therefore you're anticipating and waiting for it. And therefore, what that is saying is that God knew you before he even started you. God knew us before he started us. He knew what he wanted to do with us. He knew the life that he wanted us to live. He knew what he wanted us to achieve. He knew what he wanted us to accomplish on this world before he even put us here. God planned us before, in fact, God finished us before he even started us. God planned us before he executed us, if that makes sense. God, how do you plan? You sit down and you think. You think of something you want to achieve, right? You set yourself a goal. I want to do so and so. I want to start a church, for example, or I want to start a business, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, I want to travel to this country. You sit down and you think. That's the process. And after you've determined what it is you want to do, you begin to strategize how you're going to do it. So if you want to start a business, you start then think to yourself, how am I going to do it? What's the plan? So you begin to write your business plan. You begin to forecast how much you're going to need, what your expenditures are going to be, the things that you need to buy, the staff that you need to get on board, things of that nature. You begin to plan. And you do all that before you even start the business. You finish the plan before you start the business. In other words, when God says he has a plan for us, God is saying that he's already gone through the process of thinking out everything we're going to need in order to make it and be successful in life before he even put us here in the first place. God had thought through all those things and put the plan in place for our success. And then he started us. In essence, he finished us before he started us. He finished us before he started us. How do I know this? Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 1. Jeremiah chapter 1, from verse 4. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Wow. And before you were born, I set you apart, and I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. This is God speaking to Jeremiah, and God is telling Jeremiah that before you were formed in your mother's womb, before your father's sperm fertilized your mother's egg and you became a fetus in your mother's womb, I already knew you. You didn't start when the sperm and the egg met. You started even before that in my mind, because I was thinking about you and I was thinking about what I wanted you to accomplish. And when I finished putting the plans in place of what I wanted you to do, then I allowed you to be planted in your mother's womb. But even before the planting in your mother's womb took place, I already knew what I wanted you to do. And what I wanted you to do was explained in verse 5, is that I appointed you to be a prophet to the nations. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. So God already knew that he wanted a prophet to the nations before Jeremiah was even a baby in his mother's womb. So when Jeremiah now landed in his mother's womb, he wasn't in his mother's womb by accident. It was in his mother's womb because God had a plan. It was in his mother's womb because God had a plan that he needed to execute, and Jeremiah was the person he had chosen to execute that plan. And And that's why Jeremiah was put on the earth. And this rule doesn't just apply to Jeremiah, because God uses this as an example to give us a glimpse into our own lives, that we are not here by accident. That God put us here for a reason, that before we were formed in our mother's womb, God had a plan for us. And He already completed that plan in His mind, and He just put us here on earth so that we can execute that plan for Him. In other words, success in life is already guaranteed. You cannot fail if you stay with God. As long as you're walking in God's plan for your life, as long as you're staying in the reason that God brought you here in the first place, then you can't fail. Because there's no way you can stay in the plan of God and fail. It's impossible. But the question we have to ask ourselves is that, are we in the plan of God, or have we deviated from the plan that God has for us? Have we deviated from the purpose for which He put us here in the first place? So not to deviate too much from my message, I'm talking about God has an end in mind, and He finishes us before He starts us. In fact, it's because God had already completed our end that He gave birth to us, so that we can start the journey that He had already prepared and finished in His mind. And life really begins when you discover your expected end. Life begins when you discover your expected end. Life begins when you discover your expected end. Life truly begins when you discover the purpose, the reason, the why. When you discover why you were planted on this earth. Because until you discover that thing, until you discover it, it's like existing. You might be doing good things and you might be doing wonderful things. But if you're not doing the very thing that God put us here for, if we're not fulfilling God's plan for us, then what's the point of it all? We have completely missed the purpose why we were here in the first place. And we might as well not have been here. Because God said specifically here to Jeremiah that I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Now imagine Jeremiah went for another path and decided, you know what, God, that's your plan. I don't want to be a prophet, even though that's why you created me, but I don't want to abide by your plan. I want to do my own thing. I want to do business, or I want to do hairdressing, or I want to be a fisherman, or I want to be a farmer. I don't want to be a prophet. If he had done that, then he would have completely wasted the purpose for which he was put on the earth, because he would have been completely out of God's will. And therefore, there might be so many people in life that we might even perceive and feel like, oh, this person is successful because they have a lot of money. But in man's eyes, that might be success, but in God's eyes, it might not be success, because if they're not in God's plan and will for their lives, then whatever they accumulate or whatever they achieve, God is not really interested in, because they're not doing the things that He put them here to do. And therefore, in God's eyes, it's not really success. Therefore, I believe that true success in life is being in the plan and purpose of God for your life. Because anything outside of that is just you doing your own thing. And God isn't really impressed with that. What impresses God is when we stay in line with the plans that He has for us. Amen? So life begins when you discover your expected end. And your expected end is simply your purpose in life, or your assignment in life. It's why God put you here. In Jeremiah's case, it was to be a prophet. In your case, it might be to start a business. In another person's case, it might be to start a school. You know, God has different plans and purposes for everybody. And that's why it's dangerous to measure ourselves by other people and to compare ourselves with other people. Because the purpose that God has for them is completely different from the purpose that God has for us. They're running their race, you have to run yours. And measuring yourself with other people is pointless, because you're both here for different reasons. If somebody's here to farm and I'm here to pastor the church, I can't compare myself with the farmer. Even if the farmer has a bigger house, a nicer car, whatever. It's not about that. It's about making sure you're in line with God, with what God put you here to do. Okay? So, God always begins with the end in mind.